Hi, I'm Dr. Vonda Wright, and this is Hot for Your Health. Join us for conversations on the bleeding edge of science, health, and culture as we bring you tech innovators, thought leaders, and the movers and shakers who are transforming science fiction into your new health reality. Hi, Dr. Vonda Wright. I am so happy to have you back on another episode of Hot for Your Health, where today we're going to do a deep dive into your nutrition, your gut health, and what it means across your lifespan. So I'm really happy today to have Dr. Federica Amati join us. She is the head nutritionist for science and nutrition at Zoe. Now, Zoe, the company, I remember when it first launched online, surrounding the work of Dr. Tim Spector, and they have just grown a marvelous group of scientists and clinically minded people, of which Dr. Amati is one. She has a PhD in clinical medicine research from the Imperial College of London, as well as master's degrees in public health and nutrition. So what that means is she's not only deep in science, but in its application to our real lives. So I'm so happy to have you here today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure. You're such an inspiration, and the work that you do to help women access evidence-based advice is so needed and so welcome. So I'm really happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm certainly happy to have you and all your knowledge. I want to start really basically and expand up as we move along. And, you know, when I first heard about the microbiome, it was in a fascinating innovation summit, and someone got on stage and said, more than all the stars in the sky are the bacteria in your gut, and we're going to call it the microbiome. It might have been Tim. I don't really remember who it was. It was many. But it fascinated me to think about, oh my God, there's a world within that we have no idea about. And come to find out over the years, it has to do with our brain. It has to do with our mood. It has to do with our complete health. So if you don't mind, let's just talk for a few minutes about what the microbiome is, who are the key players, where does it come from? Because we're born sterile, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it is such a fascinating topic, and the pace of growth in this area of research has been amazing in the past 20 years or so. So when we think about the gut microbiome, it's exactly as you said, Vonda, it's this universe inside us. It's an ecosystem that lives in our gut, and there's these trillions of microbes that are expressing trillions of genes. And when we actually map out the genetic material from our gut microbiome, it just totally overwhelms the human microbes, the human genetics, right? So, you know, we think about human genome as being this like 20,000 genes, and we look at the gut genome and it's like trillions. So we are really holobionts. We're just walking around. We're just a world for our microbes. We don't even, you know, we're just there as a vehicle for them, really. So it's really important to think about this, because we co-evolved with our gut microbes. You know, we have such a long colon. So our large intestine is much longer with much more surface area compared to other mammals. And when we look at the evolutionary theory of why humans have such a big brain and so much mental capacity, the gut microbiome plays a huge role in that. So we have co-evolved with these microbes, which have allowed us to extract so many more nutrients and to produce so many more helpful chemicals from our food compared to other mammals, that actually allowed our brain to grow to how it is now. Because of course, the gut microbiome is involved in lots of things, but it is also involved in actually just making us more efficient at breaking down our food and creating useful things with it. So it extracts additional energy from our food, but it also extracts additional nutrients. It creates new chemicals for us, including vitamins like vitamin K, but also hormones and enzymes and neurotransmitters. The gut microbes they're like mini personal pharmacies. And the more we feed them with helpful things, the more helpful chemicals they can make for us to support our health. So when we think about this ecosystem in our gut, we can liken it to the Amazon rainforest, where when the Amazon rainforest, when those trees get cut down, it doesn't just impact the Amazon, it impacts the entire world's systems. It impacts how the world's health is. And that's the same for us. When our gut microbiome and that ecosystem is disrupted, it directly impacts the rest of our bodies. And what's really interesting when we think about it, if we take a step back, it makes sense because we know that food on our diet plays such a pivotal role on health outcomes. And the gut microbiome is the mediator for that. So, of course, within digestion, there's also a lot happens at the small intestine level and the liver. But the ecosystem between the gut, the liver, like the gut-liver axis, really explains how and why food has so much power on our health. So when we look at our gut microbiome and we think about these little microbes that are in there waiting for the next meal, they're really an ecosystem that depends on us providing the right materials for it to thrive. And every time we make a meal decision, every time we make a food choice, we're either supporting that ecosystem or we're posing a challenge to that ecosystem. And what's really helpful is that, helpful for us when we try to give advice, is that the things that support that ecosystem are the same things that support the rest of our bodies, the same things that support our liver, and the things that challenge that ecosystem are the same things that challenge our liver, same things that challenge our metabolism in our body. So it's actually all very much in harmony with each other. But I find that explaining the gut microbiome and explaining how it works is a really good way for people to engage with this process, because micronutrients are quite abstract, macronutrients are abstract. Understanding metabolic pathways is only for those who are interested in learning about it. It's not common knowledge. But when we think about feeding our gut microbes, nurturing this internal garden, it's a much easier way to think about it. And I think it's more engaging.
Well, and it certainly is, because I think when most people think, oh my God, she just says that I'm full of bacteria and that's so heebie-jeebie. But the fact of the matter is we can't exist without them. And so to view them as allies that do all the things that you just talked about, and I had never heard of it explained the way you did, that it's our gut, because of how miraculous it is at pulling out nutrients that have made us able to develop this highly folded brain, for instance, versus, if I grew up on a farm and cows have 4 stomachs and they only eat grass, and, it's a very different, and their brains aren't like ours. It's a very different system that gut that has given us the nutritional advantage to grow this beautiful brain. That's a wonderful perspective. And so it makes sense that if we feed our guts trash, I often say to people in public, people I work with, I'm like, listen, your body is not a garbage disposal, right?
Yeah, so true. So true. What happened to my body as a temple? That was much better.
Oh, that is so much better. I mean, and think of the things, if you put it in that perspective, what you would bring into a temple versus what you chuck in the garbage disposal. Well, what kinds of things? I'm going to tell you a story, and then you can use it to answer my question. Maintaining this gorgeous microenvironment that you've now just described, and not causing a dysregulation of good versus bad, because there are some bad bacteria. My poor mother, my darling mother, who's now 85, about 10 years ago, for whatever reason, she got this overgrowth of bad bacteria in the microbiome in her gut. That can happen. It matters how we tend this garden, right?
Yes. So what you just said is so true. If we go back to the garden analogy, if we're not looking after our plants, if we're not giving them healthy soil, if we're not sort of introducing new seeds and watering it regularly, then you will end up with a garden that's a bit more barren, the soil is dry, the topsoil's gone, and maybe there's some weeds and some plants that actually you don't want there because they're the kind of invading plants. So exactly that happens to our gut. If we don't eat the foods that support the good, helpful microbes that make all these really positive chemicals for us, it doesn't just stop. There's decrease in abundance, and then the less helpful microbes increase in abundance because they'll be breaking down and using the foods that you are eating. So where you have like not enough fiber in your diet is one of the primary drivers of this, but perhaps you have a really high intake of burgers and buns, that's a very high fat diet that has saturated fat from animals and lots of animal proteins, that if it's too much of that actually results in a more pro-inflammatory profile. So the microbes that love breaking down carnitine as an example and saturated fat from animal meat, they produce pro-inflammatory metabolites. So if you don't tend to it, the dysbiosis does happen and you get less helpful microbes taking over. And it happens all the time. It's important to note that the makeup of that ecosystem is decided largely by our diet. So 50%, 53%. But there's still like a good 47%, which is decided by stress, by what medications you're taking. So what have you been prescribed, by where you live, your environment. So everything that we breathe in, we also swallow, right? So if you're breathing in a lot of environmental toxins and pollutants, that also doesn't help. So there's other factors that contribute to our gut microbiome composition, to these sort of xenobiotics, as they're called, these chemicals that are not part of our natural diet we evolved with. So we have to think about that too. If for some people, gut dysbiosis can be a direct result of having to take antibiotics, but the antibiotics will have saved their lives. And so then we deal with the dysbiosis as a consequence of that life-saving intervention. For others, it might be that they have been living under a state of chronic stress, and that has really disrupted their metabolism, it's disrupted their sleep, it's disrupted their gut barrier, and now they have this dysbiosis. So we have to look at the holistic picture. And then, but the good news is that our most powerful tool to shift it back to positive is food. So our daily food choices are something that we can really harness and make a difference to people's health with. So that's what we've clearly seen. So I don't know I think you've seen about our randomized clinical trial where we actually gave people Zoe as an intervention. So gave it to them in their own homes, in a remote trial, like in the wild west of our daily lives, right? And we said, do this intervention and see how you get on. And then the control group were given standard dietary guidelines with the support of nutritionists. And after 16 weeks, we saw the Zoe group had a flourishing of helpful microbes. It was amazing when you look at the graphs in the publications in Nature Medicine. Beautiful. All these lovely, helpful microbes increased in the Zoe group. Whereas in the control group, there was like a couple, but not that many. And it's just this idea of, just within 16 weeks, you can see this flourishing of your gut garden. And we repeated a similar result with another randomized control trial we did for Biome, where we gave a really simple intervention with Daily 30, which is our fiber-rich supplement. That saw in 6 weeks, which I think enough time, we saw this flourishing. So if we give our gut microbes the food they love and the soil they need, if we go back to the garden, they will literally give us back lots of love and flourishing and beautiful postbiotics, short-chain fatty acids, all these functional metabolites that help to maintain our gut microbiome health, our gut wall health, like the intestinal barrier is intact, and the immune system thrives from that as well. So it's really exciting.
Well, in all of that, what you just described, the structural changes, not only to the gut microbiome itself, but to the physical gut, it can go a long way towards curing the gut inflammation that leads to things like leaky gut or the terrible bloating that, we discussed that I serve a lot of midlife people and who, when I measure their a short panel of biomarkers, are uniformly highly inflamed. And so let's go a little deeper into what is the kind of dietary intervention that Zoe provides. What can it do specifically for the people that listen to me with their, I feel bloated all the time, I measure their biomarkers, and they are frightened by the level of inflammation that they live with? And then I don't want to forget to talk about, is there a role for additive probiotics? Because there is a big market for that. And we want to make sure that we're adding people we want to our microbiome, if at all, right?
We want the good guys. Yeah, exactly. So we actually, the good guys, we actually just finished the largest trial on nutrition and menopause, and the results were really exciting. So it was eye-opening, actually, and really exciting. The eye-opening bit is that 99.8% of women reported at least one symptom. So we can all stand together and say that there is no such thing apart from 0.2% of sailing through with absolutely no consequence, like with no feeling at all about it. So that was really enlightening. We also found that women who made this dietary change, so of the women who started Zoe, so we took their menoscale score. The menoscale is a way of understanding symptoms, not only a number of symptoms, but also impact on daily life, that we developed with the British Menopause Society, and is now a free-to-access tool for any woman or any person who wants to see, you know, where do they rate for their age compared to other women. And it's zoe.com/menoscale, super easy to find. So we measured the menoscale score at the beginning before they started Zoe. And then we followed up with them a few months later just to say, like, hey, like, how are you doing with that, by the way? And we were expecting to see some improvement. Now, we had women in the cohort who were both taking HRT and not taking HRT. As expected, the women taking HRT started with a lower menoscale score. So their symptoms were lower, as we'd expect. And we thought, okay, well, we might see some change in the women who aren't taking HRT, especially. Well, we found that women who changed their diet following Zoe, again, in their own homes, at their own pace, according to their environment and lifestyle, saw an average reduction of 35% on their menoscale score across the symptom categories, right? Now, what's amazing is that we saw that in women taking HRT and not taking HRT. So it's this idea, right, that we have as women in the past 5 to 10 years, we're building up this amazing toolkit of things that we can do that are evidence-based to support our menopause transition. And what was so exciting about the study is that the changes to diet, and we'll talk through them quickly, that we encourage in Zoe can reduce your symptoms, the symptom score by 35%. Now, what I found really engaging and so hopeful is that actually we saw that psychological symptoms were the ones that had the biggest impact on daily life.
Wow, I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah, so women reported vasomotor symptoms were common, but in terms of how much of an impact is this having on your life, anxiety, rage, but the psychological symptoms had much more of an impact. And you can kind of, as I say it out loud, it makes sense, right? That they would have a more of an impact. Now, in that category of symptoms, we saw a reduction of 38%. So the most improvement was seen in the psychological symptoms. And, you know, we mentioned briefly earlier the gut-brain connection, gut-brain axis. And I mean, I think if this speaks to it so much, we saw this great improvement across the board, but really psychological symptoms seem to improve the most. So the advice that we provide in Zoe is really based on your markers of health that we record during the testing phase. So you receive this beautiful yellow box, and inside the kit, there is a continuous glucose monitor. There are some cookies, which are formulated standard test meals, right? That are very high in sugar and high in fat. But I want to note that actually, so they were formulated by Professor Sarah Berry, and they are designed to mimic a standard meal in the US or the UK, which are high in sugar, high in fat. So sad, but true. But they're all the same. So everyone who does Zoe takes part in this remote clinical trial because we're all doing exactly the same protocol. And we measure your glucose response. We also measure your blood fat response with a Tasso device that sticks to your arm and collects blood. And then we look at the fats in that. And crucially, gut microbiome sampling. So you take a scoop of your poop, send it in the post. Now, the way that we analyze that scoop of poop is unique. We use the most advanced type of genomic sequencing that's available. And we also have developed with our colleagues at Trento a software that can uniquely analyze the entire genome and map it against relevant health outcomes. Because it's really, it's interesting to know how many plants you have in your garden. But what we really want to know is, are those plants keeping you healthy, or are those plants causing a dysbiosis? And that's what we do with our score. So we then put all of that together with your personal history, with your food frequency questionnaire. We look at what you're normally eating, and we create personalized scores. So the personalized scores help people to eat the foods that are most likely to support their metabolic health and their gut microbiome. But of course, Zoe is underpinned by public health nutrition. So of course, it doesn't fly in the face of evidence-based medicine. It is very much helping people to include more whole grains, more whole plants, more fresh fruits, more vegetables, more mushrooms, more legumes, more nuts and seeds, because we know that's really helpful for good overall health. And then the personalized metrics allow us to tweak towards specific foods that are really helpful for your gut microbiome composition and for your current metabolic health status. So if you're like me and you're actually quite good with carbohydrates, I'm a fairly efficient glucose metabolizer. My scores will say you can include these foods freely. Things like more refined carbohydrates, I can include more in my diet, compared to my husband, who I love dearly, but who has really quite terrible blood glucose control. And so his will be scaled down and it'll be more occasional. But he, for example, can tolerate meat much more than me. He does not have as many of the pro-inflammatory microbes that digest meat. I have lots of those. So meat scores more highly for him. And it's the same with blood fats. Some of us are just more able to clear blood fat effectively from our circulation. And so we'll be able to eat, higher fat foods more freely. And that personalization on top of the solid public health nutrition advice is what makes the Zoe magic and makes it so effective at actually improving quality of life and health outcomes.
So what you've done just on the backside then is you've taken decades of public health data, you've taken all the new technology, and surrounding that, you've built algorithms to personalize nutrition that you can then test with results, right? So you've created these algorithms so that when a person puts their data in, it's not you sitting there calculating their macros, but you know enough from the science and you know enough from their data to be able to meld it together so that their data is their data, right? That's how
exactly.
You know what I want to about a year ago, I think I'm going to do your program. It's very interesting to me, and I'll tell you why.
You must do it, Vonda. I can't believe you haven't.
I can't believe it either, since I've known you've been around since Tim first said I'm doing this thing. But I am a data geek, and so about a year ago, because I'm a doctor, I can prescribe my own stuff. I got a CGM, and I just for a year. And after about 3 months, I'm going to tell you what I learned. But I am so addicted to understanding that, whatever, I don't eat cookies anymore, but whatever thing I know for sure. And this is, I'm saying this to people listening to let you know that I think data is important, because you can't guess about these things, right? I know from wearing a simple CGM that I am extremely carb sensitive, that if I want to not have giant spikes, that go down. I mean, I've got a great pancreas. I really don't have insulin resistance because I work out a lot, knock on wood. But if I don't want that spike at all, I have to be really fiber-based. I have to be really protein-based. I know that my sugar spikes when I'm in the OR, whether I've eaten my normal breakfast or not, because of the stress that comes with that activity, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I could go on and on about, I know that when I'm actually hungry, my blood sugar is 60 or 69, right? I'm not bored. It's not something my body is actually requiring fuel. But I think why it would be interesting for me to do Zoe is that in the last maybe 3 months, for the first time in my life, I have gotten the feeling of bloating. Now, I am one of the lucky ones that have never felt that way. And so I self-remedied. For the first time in life, I'm like, okay, everybody's saying probiotics work. I started eating healthy yogurt. I've never eaten yogurt. I don't like the taste of it. but adding whatever is in there, lactobacillus reuteri or whatever, I've solved that problem, right? So that's just a comment for me to say, yes, I believe you. All of this is critical. I've seen it. But what is your take on all this probiotic business that's going on? And can we really reverse inflammation?
Yeah.
To the level that I think.
Yeah, I think probiotics have a lot of promise, and there's a lot of research ongoing. There's some brands that have done some pretty good randomized controlled trials to see what the impacts for specific health outcomes, whether it's constipation, diarrhea. And it's clear from the evidence that there are some single strains that have powerful impacts. S. boulardii is my favorite. If you're taking antibiotics, it's actually a yeast, but if you're taking antibiotics and you want to avoid antibiotic-induced diarrhea, S. boulardii is going to help. There's some that have really clear evidence. Overall, though, I think what's important to remember is with probiotics, the capsules and the pills, if you stop taking those, then the effect is likely to go away. And this is partly because of niche, partly because of niche theory, which it's hard to know. So in your garden, if it's a very well planted, thriving garden, and you're throwing in a few seeds every now and then, it's hard to know whether they'll be able to form a niche within your garden to actually thrive and create their own pocket. Now, when we eat foods that have probiotic strains in them, so if you make fermented foods part of your diet, we don't really have that problem because you can just continue eating these foods. So instead of buying an expensive course of probiotics, and I have to caveat that a lot of these don't have science behind them, unfortunately. They're just marketed without much scientific backing. If you just eat the fermented foods every day, and that can be yogurt, it can be kefir, it can be, sauerkraut and kimchi have this additional benefit of also being fiber rich as well as probiotic rich. And they're also delicious and have flavor and texture and incredibly cheap to make at home if you want to. So fermented foods have more convincing evidence to support them as an ongoing intervention to reduce inflammation. So there was a beautiful study out of Stanford by Sonnenberg, and they actually, in their trial, they compared a high fiber intervention with a fermented food intervention group to really untangle what the benefits are of fermentation itself, not just high fiber. And in their results, they looked at the immune system as their outcome. And the immune system modulation from a high fiber diet was an improved immune response. But in the fermentation group, it was an improved dampening of unnecessary inflammation. So different mechanisms, different outcomes. Really great paper. Highly recommend you have a look. And so my advice is unless you're trying to prevent antibiotic-resistant diarrhea, S. boulardii, or you have a specific outcome, there are specific strains that are helpful also for vaginal health, for example, if you're going through a round of recurrent UTIs or recurrent. But aside from these specific strains that do have evidence, the best evidence we have is to really increase your intake of fermented foods as a daily dietary habit. So find the one you love, and not everyone will love yogurt and kefir and sauerkraut and kimchi and miso and kombucha. Find the one you love, find a couple if you can, and then just try and have them daily. And that seems to be a much better way to naturally improve gut microbiome sort of health, together with a high fiber diet, which is what creates the soil to maintain these helpful microbes.
I love that advice because fermented foods are not hard to come by. They're not that expensive. And in fact, I think, over like the entire United States, over COVID, I started baking sourdough. And so my little culture, is now 5 years old. And, when you bake it, the microbes die, but I always sneak a little bit of the dough. But people listening, start making my own sauerkraut, and I will teach you how. That would be a fun other project.
It's so good, and it's so easy, and it's fun. It is fun. It tastes better when you make it yourself, right? It tastes better.
So, and I love cabbage, so we're going to do it. So, Frederica, I'm a Federica, that I'm a bone doctor. I'm a muscle and bone doctor. So let's pivot for 2 seconds and talk about, does the microbiome have anything to do with bones? And should I pay more attention?
Yes, it does. So I love that you asked me this, because I was actually asked to give a talk on nutrition for osteoporosis. And this is just, for the osteoporosis charity here. So I started doing, I was like, let me just update myself. Let's see if there's anything new that I missed that could be helpful. And there is indeed a wonderful study published in Nature looking at the gut-bone axis. Now, so okay. Now, it was amazing, because basically what these researchers found was that specific strains in the gut microbiome can produce, and we talked about the fact they produce lots of different chemicals, can produce chemicals that essentially either encourage or discourage the breakdown of bone with the osteoclast, osteoblast systems. So your gut microbiome composition can directly influence the messages that your bone tissue is receiving to either repair, break down, or replace bone tissue. When I found this out, I was mind blown, because it's brand new information. I was like, okay, this is another layer of amazingness. I just written a review on gut microbiome and health. So I just reviewed all the axes quite recently, and I was like, there's a new one. So actually, it's really exciting. It helps us to understand why certain foods in diets can really help with bone health. So we all know that calcium is important, but specifically women, especially, who eat a lot of leafy greens in their diet, so a really high amount daily, multiple times a day of leafy greens, really seem to have better bone health. And so here's now a mechanism by which we can understand that it's beyond the calcium. That yes, there is calcium in leafy greens, but there's the fibers and the polyphenols, the colorful chemicals in the leafy greens, are also acting on the microbiome, and there's an additional support system there. So it's really exciting to see more research that can help us to explain why certain dietary patterns seem to be so protective. So I will send you a link for that, because it's a really interesting piece of research. And I think, I find that the importance of, I'm very fascinated with looking and learning more about medicine for older people. So I'm doing a course at the moment, and there is clearly one of the most important things we can do to maintain ourselves really independent is to look after our bone and muscle health. Absolutely. And I think it's such, there's so many conversations about longevity, and I just think at the end of the day, I'm a big fan of talking about functional aging, because we can talk about, extending our years, but if we're not able to do the things independently that we really value now, then really what's the point? So I know I'm preaching to the converted here, by the way. I know this is one of your absolute, but so for me, it's so important that we do understand more about what can we do to really support our fundamental structure that helps us to move, to get up, to walk around, to be able to live an active life well into our older age.
Well, and you know what? This starts, you may have heard me say this before, but as I think about what you just said, it's not just about, because I like people to get their calcium from their green leafy vegetables, and if they can get it all, I'd love that for them. And I love that you just talked about this paper that explains the signaling pathways for osteoblasts and osteoclasts, because people who are used to listening to me know that those are cells I talk about all the time. But I would love for you to also help people understand, okay, everybody gets it, that old people fracture. What they may not know is what I see in my clinic is that I have 24-year-olds coming in with osteoporosis or young women. And I think that it happens for a few reasons. And so I think this nutritional message has to happen as we're leaving our parents' homes if it's never happened before. I think young women present to me with osteoporosis because there is still the message in society that women have to be as small as my pinky to be valuable, right? So they underfeed. Yeah. And I think we are now fully on digital generation where maybe children have spent their whole childhood sitting in a chair playing games. But also, even for active women, and maybe this is where you can pick up this conversation, even for active women, the athletes I take care of, we are 53 years in the United States into something called Title IX, which equalizes the funding for women's sports and men's sports at university. And yet, really active women may still be underfed and want to be as big as my pinky, or have never fed themselves enough that they live in relative energy deficiency and never have periods for 6 to 9 months. So I think the message that you give about nutrition and the microbiome is not just for the old people like me, but for our...
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I want to pick up on what you just said, something so important there, and that is that when we talk about building the foundations for a healthy body, it happens early in life. So we know that there's these really, looking at life course nutrition and life course medicine, there's these really key times of growth and times of development. And we need to focus our efforts in honoring those times and making sure that children are nourished. Because exactly as you just described, when we have chronic undernutrition, because girls as young as 7 have poor body image when they look in the mirror, and so they try to restrict their food to stay skinny, essentially. That is a fundamental time in life when our tissues are being formed and the actual structures of our bones and our muscles are being laid. So if we don't look after this time period, and so the first 1,000 days are the critical period. I talk a lot about this in my book. Everybody should know this. There's so much happens in that time. Then the second big growth spurt is around the age of 7, and there's a lot of brain change at that age too. So there's a double need for really excellent, not just adequate nutrition, but excellent nutrition. And then again in adolescence, we see this much increased need again for body composition change, new tissues developing. And sadly, what happens is exactly as you described, that if girls and boys are restricting their dietary intake at these critical points of growth, they do not form the bone mineral density that is required for long-term health and supporting their bodies later in life. And so it saddens me to hear that you're seeing people as young as 24. And when you combine that undernourishment with a lack of movement, this is a really important point, because I think often that we do live in a culture where people think that if they just eat a really high protein diet, they'll support their muscle and bone. And it's like, well, you need to move your body. You actually need to do the work to create the need for the protein to rebuild the tissue. Because if you're just eating the thing, but there's no challenge to the tissue to rebuild, you're not doing anything actually. And I think, it's such an important, I think, nourishing our bodies to keep us strong and it's not just strength, but happiness as well. Like, we genuinely enjoy life more if we can reconnect with the power of food as a positive influence in our life. So especially to the young girls, so sad to see how much fear there is around food and how much avoidance there is of just like, if I could just not eat, I would. But we need to really bring that back and reinstate the joy of food, make it a social occasion, use it as an excuse to share moments of preparing and creating something together, and make that food nourishing throughout the life course with a real special focus on these pivotal times of change. And the menopause is another pivotal time of change for body composition and for the way our body works. But, lots of listeners, lots of people will have children who are between the ages of 7 to 17. And we know it's a really critical time period. So, yeah, I think re-embracing food as a positive ally for health and making sure that we all have an opportunity to move our bodies in new ways, in ways that we enjoy, so we can actually sustain it. So we don't all have to be great at running, or, not everyone has to love going to spin class. Find what you love. Dancing is great. Yoga is great. Tai Chi is great. Walking is wonderful. Like, find something that works and you can build on that. But the two things have to go hand in hand, because we know that if you exercise and you don't nourish yourself, exactly what you just described happens. Hypothalamic amenorrhea is so frequent and common, and it's devastating for fertility later as well. We want to avoid that. But also, if you eat all the food but you don't move, you're not stimulating your body to build that foundation, that strength. So the two do have to go hand in hand, right? But there is, there is some evidence to suggest that even people who do suffer with osteopenia or osteoporosis can make some pretty significant changes to help with bone mineral density when those two things are both working together. So strength training and actually impact like activities together with a very nourishing diet, rich in lots of nutrients and high in fiber. And I want to pick up earlier, you mentioned that you've noticed that a high fiber, high protein diet is really helpful for your metabolism. And I would love to say that's exactly what the Mediterranean diet is. Lots of pulses, lots of whole grains, lots of nuts and seeds. Those foods offer us both protein and fiber. And if we eat an abundance of those foods with the occasional oily fish, with the occasional meat, we will get a variety of nutrients and benefits from protein and fiber and healthy fats. Because I think often people hear high protein and they think, oh, I've got to have a chicken breast for breakfast, a salmon fillet for lunch, and then like steak and chips for dinner. That's not the case. You can get fiber and protein from the best foods in the world that are seen in all the longevity dietary patterns in the world.
Well, I love this conversation. I think we've covered on a lot of new things that my crowd in particular may have not have heard. And I'm going to go look up a couple of these articles, particularly the Nature one about the bone gut axis.
Oh, yeah, I'll send you that. Yeah,
do. As we wrap up, I want you to promise that I'm going to do the Zoe. I'm going to order one. We'll do it. And then what I want is that you somehow pull my data from your database. And let's go. I'm happy to use my example for people that follow me to say this is what we found with my, just like I did.
Amazing. A results call. I love doing
results call. Let's a public results call to say, well, no wonder you've noticed this with your CGM. I think that would be a lot of fun. Would that be fine with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that one, but that's such a good idea. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. And I'm fascinated to watch Zoe grow as a company, but also watch the data that you're releasing, because I think that's really the critical part. It's not just software, it's the science.
Yeah. You're so right, Vonda. We know all the diet data that we have from our members goes science only. We use it to publish scientific evidence. We publish over 60 peer-reviewed papers. We are passionate about making the science useful for everyone. And we're so grateful to our members for trusting us to do that with their data.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Amati. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Dr. Vonda Wright. See you next week.